Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hi, come on in. Thank you.
We have some real troopers. They did all 3 days. I'm seeing some similar names.
That's awesome.
Thank you for tuning in for all three. That's amazing.
All
And
right.
if it is your first one, that's great too.
I am going to launch the poll. So if this is your third day, this is your third time filling out the poll, but we just love to know where people are tuning in from today. What's your gardening experience and what kind of garden do you garden at? So feel free to fill out that poll, and you can also introduce yourself more in the chat.
Renee, hi. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Kara. Hi, Karen. All right, everybody's showing up. Thanks for coming, y'all. Representing the Bronx. Love to see it.
We have California.
Hi, Julie. Glad you made it.
I see Tom in the chat from my community garden in Windsor Terrace.
Cool. Love to see it. Hi, everyone. Come on in. Shout out in the chat where you're joining us from. Where do you garden? Do you garden? Hi, Rashida. Hi, Marie. Hi, Rita. Hi, Thomas. Come on in, everybody. Welcome. We're going to give everybody a few minutes to jump on in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Fantasy Garden in Brownsville. I love that name, y'all.
That's awesome.
It is. Hello, welcome, everybody. Sunnyside Community Garden. What's up?
We've got Julie, who I'm glad you could make it in today, Julie.
Julie, not to worry. Videos will be sent to all participants for the previous days. Thank you for making it today. We see you, we celebrate you. Come on in, everybody. Welcome. Thank you, Julie. We think we're great too, but thank you for saying that. No sneaking, Renee. Arms wide open. You welcome. Pull up. No sneaking. We happy to see you. Thank you. We have a wonderful presentation for you guys today, and we're excited about this one. We're excited about all of them, but we're really excited about this one too.
Oh, awesome. Eileen just finished planting perennials at PS 207 in Queens.
Woohoo!
That is great to hear.
Nice.
All right, maybe we'll give everyone one more minute to join in, and then we'll get started with our presentation.
Hi, Martin. Oh, I love that name too. Neighborhood Advisory Garden in the Bronx. Francine Rogers. Nice. And forgive me if it's not Martin and if it's Martine. Hi, Sammy. Come on in, everybody.
All right. If anyone hasn't filled out the poll, I'll give you a few more seconds to do so. All right, I'm going to end this poll now so we can see who we've got. Eve, you want to take it away?
Yeah, it looks like a lot of folks from New York City, a lot of intermediate gardeners, lots of home gardeners. This is great. We're really excited to be with you all today, so let's just go ahead and get started. Oh, did this, okay. So we are Grow NYC. We protect the environment, create green spaces, help people stay healthy, and give them opportunities to make a positive impact. So our work is centered around conservation, green spaces, education, and food access and agriculture. The ed team is here with you today, so we're going to stick our website in the chat, and you can take a look and learn a little bit more about what we do. but we've got a lot going on today. So just some housekeeping things. You can submit questions using the Q&A feature or function, and that's at the bottom of your screen near the chat and the polls. There should be a little thing that says Q&A. We are recording this session and we will be sending it to everybody afterwards along with the slides. So don't worry if you missed something, you can check on it later. And feel free to use the chat if you want to send us any other messages. So please put your questions in the chat. All right. I think Chloe. Oh no.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
I was having some technical difficulties,
Hectic.
but I think I'm in now. So hi, everybody. Good afternoon. We're going to get started with just a little background on what we do and who we are. So all of the presenters this afternoon are employees at the Grow NYC's Teaching Garden. Here's some photos of where we work. It's a 1-acre diversified fruit, vegetable, and flower garden on Governor's Island, which, if you're not familiar, is off the southern tip of Manhattan, about a 7-minute ferry ride. The garden is mainly an educational space, so we host field trips. We work with students of all ages, from kindergarten through older adults. We're also open on the weekends. We have our farm stand. It's pay what you'd like, donation-based. We do some tours and workshops. That's 12 to 4 on Saturdays and Sundays. And any produce and flowers that are not used during those classes or farm stand are also donated to mutual aid organizations around the city. So throughout today's presentation, we're going to be drawing on examples from our work in this space and how it relates to other gardens throughout the city.
All right, so before we begin, we would like to introduce you to our incredible Teaching Garden team. We all work very passionately to make our Teaching Garden a thriving and beautiful space. We all work together to maintain the garden, teach classes, and host volunteer groups. And we're very excited to be here with you today. My name is Aubrey, and I'm the Education Coordinator at the Teaching Garden.
My name is Eve, and I'm the Program Manager.
My name's Chloe, I'm the farm coordinator, and we also have Genevieve here. She's our garden educator, and she's supporting the chat and Q&A for us today.
So in this workshop, you're going to learn the effects of climate change on gardens, how to adapt your garden for a changing climate, and how to use these topics for education. So first, we're going to dive into some climate change pressures. So we recognize that if you're even at this workshop, you understand and know that climate change is an issue. So we're not going to delve too far into this, but we thought this was a really interesting link here that shows the pressures that we are going to be facing as gardeners. So let's see, my computer will let me scroll down. So there's 3 measures we're going to be looking at here. The first is growing degree days, which is essentially the season available for plants to grow and mature. So on the left side of this map, we have 1980 to 2009. And on the right side of this map, we have 2070 to 2099, so the future. And you can see in the past, it's much lighter. In the future, it gets much darker. So it looks like we're going to have more growing degree days because it's going to be hotter. But this isn't taking into account things like precipitation, which we know that climate change is going to have effects on the degree and the amount of precipitation. We're also looking here at plant hardiness zones. So that's the extent of winter stress that plants experience. It's basically cold hardiness of plants. And you can see, again, we're getting hotter. A theme that's going to be on all 3 of these measures. And then the last one is heat zone map. So this is areas of potential heat stress for plants and animals. And I think they found this data by all of the number of days that are above 86 degrees Fahrenheit. So just wanted to quickly look at that. If you're more interested, this is one of the resources we'll send you later on.
All right, so as you can imagine, there are a lot of changes that come with the changes in those maps that Eve just showed us. But one major theme, one major change we've observed at the Teaching Garden related to changes in climate and patterns are in insects and animals in the garden. So I'll start really broadly with the insect life cycle. In general, in winter, most insects and animals slow down. Some of them even go dormant. Some of them go elsewhere, they migrate, and some of them don't survive the winters, and a new generation comes back the next year. So as you can imagine, when we have mild winters like this one that we just had, some insects that normally would have this slow down period, this dormant period, are going to thrive throughout the whole winter. So in the garden, what this looks like is we might have to adjust what we plant or when we plant it. An example from the teaching garden is that we have a really big issue with cucumber beetles. And cucumber beetles really get to our cucumber plants and our squash and zucchini. So we tend to plant our cucumbers later in the season. So instead of May, when we could plant them according to the weather, we wait until June. And we do that because we're hoping that this big burst in the spring in the population of cucumber beetles will happen before our plants, and then the population starts to die down. This has not been the case in recent years. In recent years, we have seen cucumber beetles pretty much the whole season. It's more unpredictable. We see them in the garden in the early spring. We see them in the garden in the late fall. Can make it a little more difficult for us to plan for a successful cucumber crop in our space. Another example is this photo right here. I believe this is Genevieve's hand. These are cabbage worms that she picked off of some of our brassica plants last year. Cabbage worms are most active in the summer traditionally, so in the warmer weather. Their complete life cycle is about 3 to 6 weeks. 3 to 6 weeks is a big range. So depending on the climate and how fast they're reproducing, they can have anywhere between 2 and 8 generations in a year. So as you can imagine, 8 generations is a lot more cabbage worms than 2 generations. So these longer, warmer seasons means that we're also spending more time looking for cabbage worms and maybe having less success with those crops that they like. Okay, so this is a specific kind of insect. I want to chat a little bit about the term invasive species. This is a lovely picture from our garden. If anybody recognizes those little insects there, go ahead and put it in the chat. I'm curious. But before we get into them as an example, I want to define invasive species. So an invasive species is not just any organism that is not native to an area. Not all non-native species are invasive. So most of the food crops that we grow and the things we're going to talk about today, like tomatoes and rice and wheat, are not native to our region. That doesn't mean that they are necessarily bad. To be invasive, a species has to adapt easily to an area. It must reproduce quickly, and it must harm property, the economy, or the native plants and animals of a region. So related to climate, we see more invasive species in our climate because New York just a few years ago became classified as subtropical, which, as you might imagine, makes it easier for plants and insects from other subtropical regions, other warm regions, to thrive here when they get here. So I see there's some guesses about the spotted lanternfly. Yep, so this is the nymph version of the spotted lanternfly before they become those adults. This is a mulberry tree in our garden. And the mulberry tree is actually a weed for us. We didn't grow it on purpose, but we still like it. We still eat the mulberries. So we had a pretty serious infestation of lanternflies at the teaching garden last year, as did most of the city. We started out really freaked out. It was all over the news, right? This invasive insect, and it's going to destroy all these crops, and it was like covering buildings. And we started out just like individually spraying them, trying to catch them, trying to smush them. But we got to a point where they were just landing on us while we were teaching classes, or landing on plants while we were standing there, and they were just everywhere. And it felt really overwhelming. So what we decided to do instead was wait until the fall for when the egg sacs appear. And then it was easier to scrape those off and essentially cull the population a lot quicker, because there's about 50 to 100 eggs in each egg sac. But then we started to think about this idea of invasive species, and we noticed that the plants in our garden that were heavily infested with lanternfly, which were our grapevines, our mulberry trees, our apple trees, they didn't seem to be negatively impacted. We were still harvesting from them. The foliage looked healthy. And we also started to see chickens eating these little lanternflies. We saw a praying mantis eating a lanternfly. So we were noticing some natural predators, which is a great way to keep the population in check. So we were kind of wondering if the lanternfly is even considered an invasive species for our space, using this definition that we just gave, and whether or not it meets this definition might alter how we are managing these pests in the garden.
All right, so we would love to hear from all of you, your answers regarding who these garden friends or foes are. Get some answers in here, and then I can go ahead and read a few while you're guessing. All right, so picture number 1, for those of you who guessed tomato hornworm, you are correct. Never seen them before. Great. All right, so tomato hornworms are green caterpillars, and if you're familiar with them, then you know they will completely destroy your tomato plants. So they are definitely a foe. This picture actually includes 2 insects. The second insect that you might not see, or if you can look closely though, you'll see the rice-like cocoons you see, those are on the hornworms, and those white eggs belong to the parasitic wasp. They love using the hornworm as a host. So the babies will eventually emerge and kill the hornworm. So this is a very symbiotic relationship. And these parasitic wasps also feed on aphids, beetles, and flies. So if you spot a tomato hornworm in your garden, it could be really tempting to get rid of it right away. However, tomato hornworms are a food source for many predators. So by allowing the parasitic wasps to do their job, you're supporting natural pest control in your garden and helping to maintain a healthy ecosystem. These wasps are attracted to flowers with pollen and nectar, so it's important to plant flowers that will support them along with other insects. And then I see a guess for earthworms. This is actually a trick question. We do love our worms at the garden. However, these are not our beloved red wigglers. This is an invasive species called a jumping worm. And I would definitely recommend getting rid of them. They will damage your plants, the roots of your plants, and definitely don't add to your vermicomposting bin. All right, and then picture number 3, those are some random yellow eggs on a leaf chard, or a chart of leaf, sorry, leaf of chard. We're unsure of who they belong to. So this is a great example of what we do at the garden, which is keep species we're not 100% sure of until we can properly identify them, so we're not killing beneficial insects. And then yes, I saw it, monarch butterfly caterpillar, that's great. It's really important to distinguish between other caterpillars to avoid accidentally killing them and threatening their population even more. So the caterpillars feed on milkweed, so you'll want to have that in your garden, and the butterflies love feeding on flower nectar. And then we'll also provide a native milkweed guide in the resources section, so look out for that. So our pest management strategy at the Teaching Garden begins with identifying the species, assessing if it's a problem, then of course action or no action. The approach of waiting to see if an insect becomes a problem is an important part of insect and pest management because not all insects are harmful to plants or gardens. In fact, many of them may be beneficial to your garden, and removing them could disrupt the balance of the ecosystem. Next slide.
All right. So insects are all well and good, right? We've learned a little about them, but in New York City, and I'm sure a lot of other places, we also have rodent problems in our garden. Personally, in our garden, we have rats and squirrels, but this could apply to moles or anything else that you might have. So specifically for rats, rats breed year-round regardless of temperature, but they do slow down in the winter. They need 3 weeks of freezing temperatures to make that change and that decision to slow down, because that indicates to them that there might not be enough food right now to raise young. So with mild winters like the one we had, we always see a corresponding boom in the rat population. Rats are a little different to deal with than insects. You can see what they do to our squash here. They love to chew up our squash, our peppers, really any sweet thing we have. So our garden is literally a buffet for rats, and they can be a little bit tough to discourage. But we want to share some tips that we have for dealing with insects and rodents in your garden. So for insects, a couple of things that we can do. our used row cover. So this image here, you can see this white flowy fabric is called row cover or rime. And if you look closely, there are actually metal hoops going over our crop so we can make a little tunnel with the rime. And this essentially just prevents insects from landing on our plants, whether they're landing on the plants and chewing on them or landing on the plants and laying eggs on them. This is a way to exclude them from our crop. So we do this immediately when we transplant plants in our garden that get a lot of flying pests. So this is some bok choy. We do it for cabbage. These things are really prone to aphids in our garden, so the row cover can help. We also practice crop rotation. Crop rotation disrupts pest cycles by starving larvae who are dependent on certain plant families. So some insects, usually this works for beetles, they lay their eggs in the soil in the fall, and they expect when they hatch that generation will have the same plants above that they did last year. So when that does not happen and there's no food, it can actually have a negative effect on that population. We also have listed here companion planting and beneficial native insects, and those are two things Aubrey will cover shortly. I wanted to touch on rodents, which we have a different approach for than insects in our garden. So if you're just building out a garden bed, or if you have the capacity to remove the soil from your garden beds, one really great thing to do to discourage rats is to install 1/4-inch wire mesh under your soil, and that'll prevent the rats from digging up through the ground up into your planting area. You can also fill tunnels that you do see with sand, and this basically is harder for them to dig through than your garden soil. And if they're given an opportunity, they're just going to choose the path of least resistance and go dig a new way out somewhere else. So we do that only if we see the tunnels in a really bad place, because when they dig out somewhere else, it might be a more inconvenient place than before or a less inconvenient place. You can't tell them where to go. And then really quickly, just what not to do. We never want to introduce invasive predators into the garden. So what that means is we don't encourage you to purchase and release invasive insects. You often see non-native ladybugs for sale online on gardening stores. You have to be really careful. Invasive insects can outcompete the native ones, and they can also possibly introduce new diseases to the area. Another common garden friend, quote unquote, is a cat. A lot of farms and gardens have cats. We also discourage that. Cats decimate wild bird populations. We recommend you keep your cat indoors. Don't encourage cats in your garden space. However, one thing you can do is use cat hair to signal that a predator is around. So we actually use cat hair in little stockings hanging from our trellises around the garden to signal to rodents that there is a predator around. And then lastly, we never use any kind of poison. You can't target a single species with poison. It will poison the entire food chain from insects to birds of prey. And some poisons also can seep into your water and soil, which obviously will have negative impacts on your environment.
All right, so in this slide, we will discuss companion planting as a way to manage pests in your garden. The first picture here is overlooking the flower garden. You can see a fresh harvest of beans from our Three Sisters planting. The Three Sisters planting method is a valuable educational tool for exploring Indigenous agricultural practices, as well as to discuss the benefits of companion planting. These benefits include pest control, soil health, space utilization, and nutrient cycling. And if you're not familiar, the Three Sisters are corn, squash, and beans growing together. By interplanting corn, squash, and beans, we can observe a remarkable synergy in action. The tall corn stalks provide a natural trellis for the beans to climb, while the low-growing squash acts as a ground cover that helps to maintain moisture and prevent weed growth. In addition, the legumes in the soil fix atmospheric nitrogen, which enhances soil fertility and reduces the need for synthetic fertilizers. If you are using the Three Sisters method and your goal is to improve your soil health, we would recommend not allowing your beans to mature, as all that nitrogen will go into maturing those beans. However, since we are a teaching garden, we allow the beans to mature so students and the public can enjoy the special varieties of beans that we grow. Picture 2 and 3 here on the right, they are of nasturtiums and marigolds, and these are often used as companion plants due to their beneficial properties. If you were in the first workshop, these wonderful plants were also mentioned. So nasturtiums are an example of a trap crop that can lure pests away from the main crop. They also have a peppery flavor, which can deter some humans too. I kind of like it though. Marigolds contain compounds that repel pests as they have a strong scent, one that I do not adore, but hopefully you all do. And then strong smelling plants like herbs or alliums can also be interplanted to deter pests. And we do that a lot as well at the Teaching Garden. However, our experience at the garden shows that some pests like rats may not be deterred by strong smells such as lavender. We have a huge 8-year-old lavender bush, and under it is a huge rat home. So you win some and you lose some in gardening. Last season, we did notice that our cucurbit plants were significantly impacted by cucumber beetle and squash vine borer. And this area of the garden was very isolated and didn't include many companion plants. So this year we discussed using blue Hubbard squash as a trap crop. If you're not familiar, blue Hubbard is very attractive to squash bugs, squash vine borer, and cucumber beetles. So it's a really great trap crop plant. By using trap cropping, gardeners can reduce inputs like time, labor, and insecticides, resulting in increased yield while protecting pollinators and other beneficial insects. Next slide. All right, and then that leads us into nesting habitats. So the pictures here showcase some of our garden's nesting habitats, which are areas where we allow plants to grow freely to create a home for various species. In the fall, we have asters and goldenrods blooming, providing a perfect environment for pollinators, my favorite time of the year. In the summer, we have sunflowers everywhere. This picture shows a monarch drinking up the nectar from the tithonia, which is a favorite of theirs. And then in the spring, we've already seen bees on the chickweed, henbit, and dead nettle flowers. So it's important to leave those early weeds on the beds to provide food for those hungry insects and even us as early greens. I know myself, I just made a delicious salad with all 3 of those weeds. Eve is making a pesto soon. And then we're also making chickweed pesto with our classes next week. Most importantly, in the fall, instead of cutting everything down, we leave many plant stems in the ground to create habitats for insects and animals to hibernate in. We also never pull any roots out, instead cutting them at the base to practice no-till method. This helps support the entire ecosystem. As climate change gardeners, we strive to mimic nature and create these miniature environments to mitigate the impacts of climate change. It's also an added bonus is that it's less work for you on hot days. And if you're a home gardener, I'm sure you'd rather pull up a chair with a friend and enjoy your beautiful, lively garden instead of pulling out those weeds. Next slide.
All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some extreme weather. I'm going to be talking about heat. So everyone knows it gets hot in New York, especially if you were here last summer, you know it was extremely hot. So some of the things we can do to mitigate that heat or to garden within that extreme heat are utilizing shade. So planting in partial shade, if you have access to shade in your garden, or using things like shade cloth can help plants survive heat waves. In the Teaching Garden, we always plant our basil under our tomato plants, and the tomatoes help to shade the basil and allow them to live longer into the summer. You can also utilize movable planters or movable garden containers. So we have lots of milk crates in our garden that we use, and those are great because you can put them into the sun when it's a little cooler, you can move them into the shade when it's really hot. For watering, it's really important to water early in the day to avoid evaporation. You want to water deeply, and when it's really hot, you might even considering watering twice a day. When watering, you want to pay extra attention to potted plants and baby plants. Those established in-ground plants will be a little more susceptible to drought. You also want to choose plants accordingly. So some plants like heat and will be more heat tolerant than other plants. Native plants are usually more adapted than non-native plants. And Chloe's going to talk a little bit more about plant selection later on. You can also use mulch. Mulch can help to retain soil moisture and to keep the soil temperature down. You want to also avoid unnecessary plant stress. So the plants are already stressed in the heat. Avoid doing things like pruning, transplanting, and fertilizing when it's really hot out. Getting rid of weeds, this has an asterisk because we just talked about how sometimes it's okay to keep weeds as habitats for insects and animals. But some weeds are better at outcompeting the plants you're trying to grow. So if you have plants with large weeds with large tap roots, you definitely want to get rid of those. Anything that's going to be taking water away from the plants you're trying to grow. But for example, we often leave purslane in our garden, which grows as a weed in the teaching garden. And purslane has really small root systems, so it doesn't impact the other plants too much. And it actually helps shade out the ground, keeping the soil a little cooler and stopping other weeds from showing up. I'm going to talk about the urban heat island effect on the next slide. And then also just remember to take care of yourself. We're animals, we can experience the extreme heat. So for us, that means staying hydrated, getting lots of rest, wearing appropriate clothing that's loose, light colored and comfortable, big sun hats, working flexible hours if you can. So we, in the teaching garden, try to work earlier in the middle of the summer and avoid those really heavy lifting tasks in the middle of the day when it's super hot. Yeah. So the urban heat island effect, many people are maybe aware of, but in case you're not, it's where pavement and buildings absorb and retain heat more than natural spaces. So if you take a look at this map, you can see Central Park is much cooler, Prospect Park is much cooler than the surrounding areas. So gardens in general can help to mitigate this urban heat island effect.
All right, we're going to move on to extreme weather and instances of water, flooding, and drought. All right, so as we know, climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity of storms, droughts, and floods. This increase in extreme weather puts stress on our water systems and our combined sewer overflow. And combined sewer overflow is a huge public health concern we face, especially in the city, but one that green infrastructure can help mitigate. Our garden is built on pavement, so we are very prone to flooding due to a lack of impermeable surfaces. Many of you New York City gardeners may also be feeling that. And these photos were taken in 2019 before our bioswale and rain gardens were created. Next slide. All right, so flooding. Why do we care about extreme flooding? Well, for many reasons. And in our garden could become waterlogged, suffocating plants, leading to root rot, soil erosion. The topsoil and nutrients can wash away, leaving your soil compacted and nutrient deprived. Increase in pest population due to ideal environments being created, structural damage, and most importantly, less food for you and your community. All right, so we have a couple photos here. The picture on the left here is of our bioswale before we implemented our 2 rain gardens. You can see some flooding still, but compared to the previous photos, the bioswale itself helped tremendously with heavy rainfall. And then since adding the 2 additional rain gardens, we have not experienced extensive flooding. And if we do, it's absorbed pretty quickly into the ground. And the second photo here is of the same bioswale full of lush vegetation. And so I keep saying rain gardens and bioswales. What are they? Well, rain gardens are shallow landscape depressions that are designed to capture and absorb rainwater. And they're planted with a variety of native plants and flowers that help to absorb and filter the rainwater. The water is then slowly released into the ground or into nearby waterways, rather than flowing into storm drains and contributing to combined sewer overflow. Bioswales, on the other hand, are linear vegetated channels that are designed to slow and filter stormwater runoff. And they are typically planted with a combination of grasses, shrubs, and trees that help capture that rainwater and filter it out. If you're joining us from New York City, you have probably seen these installed along the streets. They help capture runoff from the impervious surfaces in the city and filter pollutants before the water enters the stormwater system. Both rain gardens and bioswales can provide a number of benefits, including reducing the amount of stormwater runoff, improving water quality, providing habitat for wildlife, increasing the groundwater supply, and being aesthetically pleasing in all of our landscapes and gardens. These are great additions to any type of garden or at your home, and it can look many ways. And at the end of this workshop, we'll provide a toolkit made by Grow NYC if you're interested in creating green infrastructure. Next slide. Rainwater harvesting. All right, so picture one here is of our rainwater system at the teaching garden. We rely heavily on this at the garden because we are on an island. So we don't have a lot of access to water. We're actually using it right now at the teaching garden until our water line is turned off. Unfortunately, we don't have access to that. So this helps us water the garden with non-potable water and incorporate it into as educational components to what we teach about sustainability. We did notice last season that it went completely dry due to the drought we had here in New York. And this is a pretty big tank, so that was kind of scary. So it would probably be beneficial for us to have another one at the garden. And then on the right, it's an example of an easy and fairly cheap way to harvest rainwater if you're working with a small space. And many gardeners across New York City collect rainwater this way. It collects rainwater from your downspout. So what are the benefits of rainwater harvesting? Well, you conserve potable water. It's very cost effective and can lower your bills. It can reduce stormwater runoff, which prevents erosion, flooding, and pollution in our waterways, improved plant health, and provides a backup supply of water during these times of drought. Next slide.
All right, now we're going to talk about carbon sequestration. So your garden can be a carbon sink, and here are the four main ways to, four main things to do to help your garden become a carbon sink. A carbon sink. The first is utilizing organic practices. So you want to avoid using synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides, and you want to use no-till methods. We use all of those in the teaching garden. The next is planting cover crops. This helps with erosion and can be beneficial to soil health. The next one is planting trees and shrubs when possible. Larger and more established plants can absorb more carbon than annual plants, so also using perennial plants. And the last one is using compost and composting. So composting your plant materials and food scraps and using that compost in the garden. These are all great things to practice.
All right, so we talked a whole bunch about methods of gardening, things you can do in your garden, but let's talk about what you can actually plant in your garden with these kinds of weather changes. So one tool for helping your garden succeed during times of climate change is choosing the right crops. So here are some considerations to help you decide which crops to try in your space. Things like disease resistance, drought tolerance, heat and cold tolerance. Most seed companies or seed catalogs will tell you that directly in the description of the seed or the variety. If you have a specific disease or pest issue in your space that you know of, it's probably worth researching varieties that specifically deal with that, or skipping that plant family entirely for a couple of years to try to rid your space of that issue. So earlier I talked about in the teaching garden, we have a really big cucumber beetle problem, right? We have really high pest pressure for cucumber beetles in our space. So one option for us would be to skip the entire cucurbit family for a few years. That includes all of our cucumbers, our summer squash, our zucchini, our winter squash. We're not really prepared to do that. We love those crops. So instead, the question we ask is, what varieties are more resistant to bacterial wilt, which is the disease transmitted by cucumber beetles? And I'll share some of those varieties in just a few minutes. Another thing to consider is pest preferences. So some pests have preferences related to the physical plant itself within a plant family. For squash, Aubrey mentioned the blue Hubbard squash is known to be very popular with cucumber beetles among other insects. This year, we are going to try planting a few blue Hubbard plants, and we'll plant them a few weeks before our main crop. So that'll encourage those beetles to go over and enjoy the blue Hubbard, and we can pull it out so they don't come over to our regular crop. Another example for a physical attribute of a plant impacting pest pressure is those bright green cabbage worms that we saw earlier. If you remember the picture, you can imagine that they very easily camouflage on their foods of choice, which are your cabbages and kales and collard greens. So if cabbage worms are a big problem in your space, you might choose purple cabbage or purple kale And cabbage worms are way more visible on these plants. So your local bird population will help you cull your cabbage worms, and you don't have to do as much work. And then you might also want to consider the type of seed. So there's 3 main types of seed, and they all have pros and cons depending on your goals in your space. Land-raised seeds are specific to your area. So they're likely going to be extra hardy for you, but they also have more genetic diversity. So they might not grow true to seed. And what that means is that you might get a lot of different shapes and colors in your harvest. This is okay for most gardeners. It could be fun. The Teaching Garden is actually going to try some land-raised seeds for the first time this year. We're going to try some squash and cucumbers and try to get a hardier breed because we don't care too much about the shape and the color that we get. The next kind is hybrid, which is the F1 seeds that you see often. These are bred to thrive in average conditions. So they are a combination of varieties through a controlled cross-pollination. So they do have that benefit of health from genetic diversity. They usually have some kind of disease resistance, and they usually have a consistent high yield. However, again, they are not true to seed. So if you're looking at saving seeds, this might not be the kind for you to plant. And then lastly, heirloom seeds. Heirloom seeds have been bred for a specific characteristic for at least 50 seed generations. So 50 years for an annual plant. They're open pollinated. So that gives them great genetic stability, which means that these are the ones that you want to save seeds from. If you save seeds from an heirloom plant, you're very likely to get a very similar plant in the next generation.
All right, this is a fun one. So Chloe was just discussing seed selection for disease resistance and pest issues. So these 2 pictures of corn are a wonderful example of these 2 problems that we struggle with at the garden. The first picture is of our corn last season. We really struggle with squirrels and birds eating them. So we tried to cover them with paper bags to deter them, which meant we had to hand pollinate. And as you can see, all of those kernels did not pollinate. So we'll have to try something different next year. Picture 2 is of our corn last season as well. The second problem that occurred, it was hit with corn smut. Corn smut is a fungal pathogen that lives in the soil for 3+ years and is spread by spores in the wind, water, soil. It's a fungi. So because we're an educational garden, this fungal pathogen on our corn wasn't a problem and more of a culinary surprise. However, if you are trying to grow corn, you will want to practice crop rotation in your garden or choose a different variety that is resistant to this fungus, which there are many resistant varieties. And if you're not familiar, corn smut is actually a delicacy in some cultures, particularly Mexico and Central America. It's called huitlajoche, and it's been used as a food source for thousands of years. I was familiar with this, so I was excited to cook it up and share with my team. So this taught us that corn isn't well suited for our garden. If we were concerned with production and yield, we probably would omit it from our crop plan. However, we want to continue teaching about the 3 sisters, so we are not giving up on corn probably ever. And an interesting fact is that many farmers will intentionally inoculate their corn with smut as it's highly valued. We probably won't do that. You probably shouldn't do that, but we do recommend tasting it.
All right, so I just wanted to share a few of our go-to crops that do work really well for us. So this is a short list. We grow about 50 or 60 different plants in our garden each year. Happy to share that list via email after this presentation. But I just want to say more generally, first of all, we don't do a ton of seed saving. And also, while we do want to have some harvest from our crops, we want to eat from them, we don't necessarily need the variety with the highest yield, the most consistent yield, because we're mostly an education space. So generally, we don't pay too much attention to whether a seed is F1 hybrid, an heirloom. We focus more on how the crop performs in our space. What are the pest pressures? How does it deal with the temperature and the rain that we get? So these are some of our go-tos. And for the sake of time, I'll just share the first one. We grow a lot of different kinds of peppers, and what we look for in peppers is a short days to maturity. So we grow lady bell peppers. We grow them until they're green. They're less likely to be eaten by rodents when they're green. They're not as sweet, so we go ahead and pick them then. We also usually grow shishitos and jalapenos. These are relatively pest-free for us. They grow quickly. They're heavy producers per plant, so we don't need to give them a ton of the space of the garden. And they also both have really good leaf coverage, so it prevents the peppers themselves from getting sunburned or sun-scalded from our direct sunlight. And then we also, of course, have a list of flowers. We always just want lots of colors and shapes of flowers for different pollinators. We want long season blooms that are just going to keep giving us flowers. And we always want to make sure we get flowers that do have pollen because, again, we're growing for pollinators. And then finally, we do try to grow about 10 to 15% new crops each year. And that's how we find these ones that work really well for us. A lot of times, you know, you can't learn unless you try, right? So this year we are trying celery for the first time in our space and artichokes as well. When we start a new crop for the first time, we always make sure we follow our crop rotation, and we always make sure that our soil is well amended so that we have a really clear picture of whether or not this is a good crop for us. We're setting it up for success.
All right, and last but not least, seed saving. So seed saving is a vital tool for resilient gardeners, especially in the face of climate change. It offers an opportunity to develop plant strains that are well suited to your area, like those landrace varieties that Chloe's talking about, create unique varieties that may be rare or no longer available. Unfortunately, in the past 80 years, we've lost around 75% of our seed variety in our food system, as well as those traditional ways of tending to and planting the land. So seed saving can serve as an educational tool that teaches about agricultural practices like winnowing and threshing, while fostering a sense of community by creating a seed library. And this library can help teach others about equity, food justice, and food sovereignty. By saving seeds, we can honor ancestral practices and ancient seed varieties while protecting diversity and becoming more resilient to impeding climate disasters. So overall, seed saving is an act of resistance and hope. And we hope that leaves you with a positive note.
Sorry, I was muted. Just to quickly summarize today, we talked about the effects of climate change on gardens, which essentially boils down to warmer winters and warmer and shorter winters and extreme weather events.
And we also talked about how to adapt your garden to a changing climate. So if you're choosing a location for a garden, you want to consider drainage and shade and how open the space is to wind. And you also want to select crops that can withstand whatever extreme temperatures you have in your space. You can use trial and error to find your most challenging and your most successful crops. Build a list, maybe save some seeds.
And we also discussed how to use these topics for education in a light and meaningful way to hopefully inspire others to play a role in climate mitigation.
Great, so now we're going to take some time to answer some of those questions from the Q&A. And if you didn't get a chance, take a look at the bottom of your screen to find the Q&A feature, and you can put any other questions that you have in there. So I'll start with the first one, and then we can just round robin. How to get rid of the worm? I think you're referring to the invasive jumping worm. So that was a picture that I took with students. I was really excited to see that giant worm. I did not know that it was an invasive species, so I let it be, put it back under that milk crate. But you would squish it, step on it. You could also feed it to chickens if you have chickens in your garden. I think that would be the easiest way to get rid of it.
Yeah, feeding to chickens is one of our favorite ways to get rid of an invasive insect because it's also a meal for the chicken, right? All right, the next question we have is, how do I know which rodent is eating my crops? For us, we have some very bold rodents, and we actually see them doing it oftentimes. If you are not sure and you want to know, you could always get a little wildlife camera, see what's happening in your yard or in your garden. I did that in my backyard last year, and it was very informative. There is a lot happening overnight back there. So that can be a great tool to use.
All right, next question. Does spearmint rat spray hurt plants, and any suggestions for planting sunflowers? Great questions. I'm not sure about the chemical ones that you would buy, but it would be beneficial to probably make your own spearmint spray, or you can do essential oils. I've seen a lot of people do that. And then tips for planting sunflowers. I would recommend probably starting them in trays or in trays indoors or whatever space you have available, and then transplanting them out, just because those seeds will be eaten.
You can utilize row covers. Sometimes with our things that we know chickens are going to dig up, we cover those with row covers while they're still little so that they have a chance to get bigger and more established. The next question, extreme heat. Is it okay to use mulch in the summer? Any specific tips? I think it's okay to use mulch in the summer. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. We use mulch all year round. We don't actually use mulch on our garden beds, which is something I had recommended for keeping the soil temperature down. We use mulch in our pathways to prevent weeds from growing, but we have used mulch in our beds before. I don't think there's any problem with using it in the summer.
Yeah, we, like you said, we use it year round. Mulch really sort of just keeps the soil temperature even, keeps it steady. So basically it's an insulation. It's going to keep it hot or cool. It's going to stop those extreme like spikes. It also, like Eve mentioned, it helps to retain moisture. So if you do live in an area where you're trying to use less water in your garden, mulch can be really helpful with that too.
You
All
can
right.
also use straw. Straw would probably be best if you're gonna cover your plants. It doesn't have like extra seeds like hay does, or it doesn't change the pH if you're using mulch.
Yes. And the next question, how do you cook corn smut? Yes, just like a mushroom, saute it with some garlic and onions and some oil, add it in tacos or quesadillas, whatever you'd like.
Right. What should I look for when growing callaloo in terms of insects? Callaloo is actually like a super hardy, great thing to grow. It's part of the amaranth family. It grows super fast. I've grown it before and I don't remember having any pests on it in New York City. There's actually close relatives of it in the amaranth family that grow really successfully as weeds as well. So you shouldn't really have any issues. Aubrey, you've grown it as well. Have you had issues with callaloo?
Grown it as well. I've never really seen insects on it. It's very, very hardy. DK's in with us. I wonder if she has some insight.
Yeah, we are seeing sometimes at the tail end of summer, sometimes we see issues with aphids, but they're not anything that are, dangerous or concerning. If you see the aphids, you can simply just squash them with your fingers on the leaves. We always, always, always recommend that you wash your leaves, your crops, your stems, anything you harvest from the garden properly before cooking. But the aphids they're not overwhelming, so they're definitely an easy fix.
Thanks, DK.
The next question is, does Grow NYC maintain a seed library? Not yet, but that's in our conversations of something we're hoping to implement this season. So keep an eye out on our Instagram, and maybe you can stop by Governor's Island and see our seed library. I know School Gardens also does seed giveaways. I don't know if Laura or Kristen, you want to?
Yes, I was just about to jump in. So if you are a school garden that's registered with us, you just have to be a public or charter school in New York City, then we do have a seed giveaway. So I will put the link for that in the chat. And if you have any questions about that, you can always email us.
All right.
All right.
Next question is, how do I deter New York City squirrels from eating my veggies, specifically that they always seem to eat tomatoes just prior to harvest? For tomatoes, honestly, I would recommend harvesting your tomatoes before they're fully ripe, before the squirrels eat them. We have a similar issue. Tomatoes, as long as they have started to turn color to ripen, will continue to ripen onto the plant. So if you're having a huge issue where you're not getting to eat your tomatoes, I would recommend just picking them a little bit early. The other thing you can do is like physically stop the squirrels from getting in. You could put like some kind of netting around your whole plants if you're capable of doing that.
All right, and then do council members rain barrel giveaways more than once a year? I'm not sure to that. Maybe somebody else can attest.
I can jump in on that one. So someone did ask, is there a way to get free rain barrels? And the way that I've heard of people getting free rain barrels in New York City is the council, your local council member will host a rain barrel giveaway. They partner with DEP, which is the Department of Environmental Protection, provides the council member with rain barrels, and the council member then distributes them at a community event. And so it kind of varies based on your council member. So my advice is just to reach out to the council member by phone or email and ask them to host such an event. And hopefully the more people that request it, the more rain barrel giveaways they will host. You could also try to reach out to DEP directly, but I don't know if they really give them away to the general public for free, but you can do some investigating and see what they say. I'll also say a lot of people give away rain barrels on, like, if you're on any buy nothing groups or things like that. So you can try to source a used one as well. And if you find a food grade type of tank that is, safe, has like, safe materials from different food warehouses or things like that, you can kind of make a rain barrel out of a lot of different materials as long as you know that it's, food grade.
Great. The next question is, can pine needles be used as mulch? That's a great question. I'm not sure. Chloe, what do you think?
I don't know. We don't have pine trees at our garden, so that's not a material that we have questioned using.
Sure, it's
I'm not sure about that one.
Sorry, we couldn't be more helpful, Martin. But somebody in the chat says they use pine needles. So
Yeah, a
I
few
think
people have said they use it, so seems like it works.
worth a shot.
Thank
Great.
you, chat.
So feel free to throw some more questions in the chat. I'm also going to put our emails up here, so you're welcome to reach out to me, Aubrey, or Chloe at our email addresses here if you have any questions after this presentation. If something pops in your head, our doors are always open. Thank you guys so much for attending our workshop. We really appreciate you all being here.
Thanks, everybody. Happy gardening, happy spring.
Thank you all for coming to our garden series. It was awesome and so good to see you all. We'll be sending out the resources and the recording in an email, so look out for that tomorrow.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for coming.
I see someone in the chat asked if you can use clippings from grass as mulch. I think you can. I would want to make sure you didn't spray your grass with any kind of pesticide. But other than that, I think it should be doable.
All right, I'm going to end the webinar. Bye, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.